Hey, get back here! Oh, remember a pedal jam just stole my saw.
Alright, so Martin isn't actually chasing me, he's here to help me film a video about chainsaws. So Martin's an arborist, Greener Glens. They are really well established tree surgery business, and he's also a very passionate bushcrafter. He's basically the guy to talk to about all things chainsaws. So he's brought out his quiver, which is very impressive. I brought out my little toy. And yeah, we're just going to talk about all the good things and bad things about them and what their uses are. Lovely. What a plethora of beautiful saws we have here. The wee Parker, oh, it's lonesome. Oh, diddums. The outsider. Alright everybody, well, I thought I would just give you a very quick sort of synopsis about each one of these saws. There's a varying sizes, varying shapes here. I'm sure you're wondering what they're for. I'm going to try and give you a little brief rundown of what they're for. So I'm going to start at this end. If some of you have guessed that these are climbing saws, you're right. Now these are top-handled saws. So we're going to start off here. This is my MS150. And this is a great little saw. This is essentially a pruning saw. So it's dead light, very small bar on it. It doesn't have a back handle like these ones here. The back handle is great for control and for controlling kickback, but it's very difficult to operate this when you're in a climbing harness with ropes and things coming off it, because if you imagine you've got your support system here, your life support system in front of you, and you're trying to use a saw, you know, with a back handle around about that, it's just going to get in the way. Obviously we do use the bigger saws when we're climbing, but when we can use a nice little neat saw like this that is very ergonomic, we do. Downsides of saws like this is that they can kick back very easily because we don't have the same amount of control with the back handle. But they're nice and light. I can fit this in little grooves. I can very accurately make very nice cuts when I'm pruning a tree or maybe dismantling a small tree. So this is the MS201tcm. And this is basically just a bigger brother to the 150 there. This is Stihl's sort of flagship climbing saw right now, and it's very powerful for the size. Very powerful little engine. Again, it's got the top handle on it so that it's nice and ergonomic in the tree. Back handle's not getting in my way. I can move around quite easily. If I need to, I can make a one-handed cut. We try and avoid that when we can, but it is possible. And this is, again, because it's even more powerful, kickback is severe in this saw, so you really need to be careful with this. And a lot of dealers won't let you buy saws like this unless you have a minimum of training actually working in trees, and that's climbing. So we're going to move down here. Now these saws, you might see some similarities between these first two, and that's because they are very similar. These saws here are essentially climbing saws that have a back handle. And I'm sure you've noticed something very strange about this bar as well. It's very, very pointy, very narrow, and the chain's very loose. Now this is because I use this for carving. This is my chainsaw carving detail saw. It is small and light and powerful. That's why they've used the engine off of a climbing saw, which is a pro saw, very powerful, very light, very ergonomic, but they've put a back handle on it, which means you get greater control for doing your detail cuts. Carving is a whole different ball game than just normal forestry cutting or arboricultural cutting, and the equipment is a little bit different. You want small, you want light, and you want narrow. This is a very, very narrow chain on it, very, very tiny chain. It's very, very low kickback, very, very tight bar on it, sorry, very tight nose, and it doesn't have a sprocket in it. If you want to know more about that, we'll talk more about it later, but that's what these are for. This 201C is my next level up in carving saws. So again, I've got quite a long carving bar here, but again, it's very narrow and it doesn't have a sprocket in the end. This is very, very typical for carving bars, and the chain is very, very loose. This is just for carving. The chains are supposed to be loose in carving bars because they don't have a sprocket. So if they're too tight, they'll burn out the nose very, very quickly. So don't be putting comments saying that, oh, your chain's loose. Believe me, they're supposed to be that loose. It looks odd, but it does have a reason for it. And again, that's just basically a bit bigger version of this. That's the 193. This is the 201, so it's the same engine as my 201tcm, but this is just basically with the back handle on it. And so now we're going back to saws that we would use on the ground, doing arboriculture, doing forestry, things like that. So this is a 260. Now this is a bit of a legendary saw in the forestry world and in the arboriculture world because they're great, they just don't break, they last forever. It's a really, really good model. It's a good mid-model saw that you can use all day, very light, loads of power, very, very good saw. They are old now, the 262 is out now, which is the two models beyond this one, but people still cry out for this model because it was so great and so robust. I'll give you a little look at it. There you go. Got an 18-inch bar on this. Good size bar for cutting logs on the ground. It's light enough that I can use all day. Really, really nice saw, very reliable, simple. There's not too many fancy things in it. There's no M-tronic, there's no microchips in this. It's just a straight gasoline powered or petrol powered saw. Really nice size, and this has done a lot of work for me. This has made me a lot of money, this saw. And when I bought it, it was second hand. And in fact, I think it actually been dropped out of tree before I got it, because there's a crack in the back of this handle which has never gone any further. So it just shows you the quality of the materials that were made from when they were first made like this. Some people would argue that the quality is not what it used to be, but you know, that remains to be seen. So now we're moving into new technology. This is probably the most coveted saw in this little lineup here. This is the 500i. The 500i is the first injection chainsaw in the world. There's been injection engines used in hand tools before, but this is the first time to put it in a chainsaw, and then it is an absolute blinder of a saw. It's super fast cutter, very powerful, very light, very ergonomic. The power that this has, the power to weight ratio, is extremely impressive. It doesn't have a carburetor in it, it's got an injection pump, so you know, more like a car, you know, you inject fuel in faster, so you get more fuel in, better mixture, more power, with a lighter and more simple setup, some would argue. And again, that saw is for logging big logs on the ground. It will cut through some serious timber, that saw, you know, really, really fast, really, really efficiently, and that would be my go-to saw for dismantling beyond what the 200s can handle, and really any kind of felling work now, to be honest. I would choose that saw over pretty much any saw I can think of. And we have an even bigger boy on the end here. This is the MS661c. Now I've got a 36-inch bar on this, and as you can tell, it's a lot heavier than any other saw in this. It's got a bigger capacity, much more power, much more grunt, and this can handle some serious timber. This is the saw that I would pick up if I was sawing an enormous big log that I felled into firewood. I was making lots of cuts and I was going through a lot of fuel. This is the one I would choose because it's got the grunt, it's got the power. This is one saw below the top saw that Stihl make now. This is the second biggest in their range. The only thing that's bigger now is the 881, which is an absolute monster of a saw. And I have got an MS880, I haven't brought it today, but this is a very, very good saw. I use this saw for milling, actually, more often than not, which is planking wood. So this usually sits in a frame, and I can use it to make big slabs. But this is way too heavy to be carrying around and doing forestry work with. It's just way too heavy, unless you're a West Coast feller and you're felling enormous big Douglas firs that you need that sort of power and that sort of length for. But this is very, very heavy compared to these other ones down there. But again, you choose the saw what's best for your situation. So, you know, for cutting on the ground, where most of the saw weight is in the cuts, you could sit behind that for most of the day and cut some serious timber with it.
What I miss?
I need to learn that trick.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really handy, saves walking.
Oh yeah.
My main focus, or the things I noticed, was it seems like these two saws are your standard saws for anybody that's not really an arborist. You know, if you're looking at, you know, collecting firewood.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
what you're looking at here is you're looking at a professional's chainsaw kit.
Yeah.
You're looking at, these are all pro saws. They're all for climbing, forestry, cutting serious wood. If you're looking to cut timber just, you know, for firewood, or, you know, small amounts of wood, you know, small amounts of forestry and things, you're going to be looking at these two saws. This is the sort of range you're looking at. These ones at the end are probably a bit too specialist or even a bit too big. Your 261, for me, if I was going to buy a firewood saw, you know, that's the sort of size I would be buying. You know, it's not too big that you can, you know, lump it around all day, and it's got power to be able to cut, you know, anything you'd want split by hand or lift onto a log splitter. So that's probably the sort of range of saws you're looking at for the sort of firewood processing.
Yeah. Something I am wondering. This is the thing that's really got my attention. Is I would say this saw is the most comparable to my Parker, little 58cc, and just trying to figure out, besides reliability, because I know this will last decades, and that possibly won't.
It already has lasted decades.
Yeah, it's yet to be tested with the Parker, but I feel like it's probably not going to last as long, obviously. But in terms of power and performance, what are the main differences?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's robustness. You know, these saws are not designed for just cutting the occasional bit of firewood and then sticking in your shed, you know, and polishing them and rubbing them and telling them they're a good boy. These are used day in, day out in water, in very rough environments, lots of dust, lots of mud. You know, they're used to getting banged about. You know, forestry guys in particular are very rough on saws. You know, that industry itself is very rough on saws, and they need to be able to take that extra, you know, bit of work, that extra damage, you know, that they could take. The biggest difference you're going to find is going to be in the quality of the parts. The seals and the gaskets are all going to be tighter. If basically, you can see that it's, for example, look at the chainbrake handle. The chainbrake handle on the Parker is attached on one side. The chainbrake handle on this is attached on two sides with two pivot points on either side. Just little things like that that prevent flex when you're using them, prevent them from getting broken accidentally in a van, or if you're cutting something and you have to throw out the way and run for whatever reason. You know, it does happen occasionally, or people are just rough and just chuck saws down after they finish using them. So it's going to be how hard the materials are. It's going to be the finesse that they're put together with. Yeah. If you want to look up something that will display this better, look up what Stihl has done to test out what. And I think it's Stihl. It might be Husqvarna perhaps. But they've taken the rip-off sort of copies of their saws and their own saws, and they've put them, you know, side by side in basically two destruction tests. So they'll take them, they'll clamp the bar, and then they'll put increasing weights onto the end of the handles, you know, with hydraulics.
We're not doing that today.
We're not doing that today because that will ruin your saw. But what you notice is that the genuine articles, the expensive pro saws, they take, I mean, 80% more weight before they snap, and if they do snap, they never actually snap. They just bend and deform, and very often they can be fixed sometimes. But when it comes to sort of the cheaper makes, the more budget brands, they just tend to shear, and then the entire thing is gone. You know, it's just ruined. So that's the main difference. I would argue that ergonomics are also probably better in the pro saws as well.
Dampening and stuff.
Vibration, exactly. Anti-vibration is probably going to be better as well. Something you might not think about with the sort of budget brands, but you're not going to have a guy sitting cutting, you know, for 10 hours a day with one of those. It's it's not going to happen. But you might have someone who's using these for 8 to 10 hours a day, and if you don't have good anti-vibration, you can get vibration-related injuries like white finger, and that's really it's not a good thing at all. So you really want to avoid that.
Cool.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
I've got all Stihls here, but I have no problem with other brands. It just so happens that Stihl has worked out pretty well for me. They tend to be simpler maybe and more robust, I think, than the other main competing brand would obviously be things like Husqvarna and Echo, and they're great saws, really, really good. I just find they tend to fail in a much more spectacular way. When a Stihl goes, for me personally, it tends to be something small that I can repair very easily, and it's very easy to find parts. I'd say the Husqvarnas tend to break less, but when they break in a big way. So a piston seal will go, it'll go in a big way.
Because mine is a Husqvarna rip-off, so do you think that'll go in an even bigger, worse way?
Possibly, possibly. It really comes down to how you take care of the saws. Yes, the pro saws will take more abuse than your budget brands, but I take care of these very, very well. I put good fuel in them. That's the most important thing. Good fuel, clean fuel, and the right mix of your two-stroke. Put good stuff in that.
What two-stroke oil do you use?
I use Still's own brand. I use the Stihl HP Ultra, which is the sort of higher grade of it. The new saws need that. Things like the injection models, they need that.
So much higher, don't they?
They just have much more narrow capillaries inside and much more narrow tubes. The way they're designed to have a much more thin oil, and so it's not a huge expense for me buying the really good two-stroke oil and putting it in. So I do that, and I'm very careful with my mix. I'm very careful to keep it clean. So that's the biggest thing I can tell you about keeping saws in good condition for long is good fuel and good mixing.
Cool. You mentioned about the slack chain and how that is okay. To me, that's like alarm bells. Can it not come flying off?
You'd be surprised at how it doesn't come flying off of those particular chains. I'll tell you. I'll give you an example. Okay, so you would never have a slack chain on a saw like this that you're going to be cutting your fibre. So that's going to be almost 100% of you out there who are using chainsaws. You're not going to want a slack chain. What you're going to want to do, your ideal chain tension is when you pull it, you can fit about a penny underneath the gap between the drive link, which is that little pointy bit, and the top of the bar. So that's your perfect chain, and you don't want it to be super tight because you'll wear out your components. You just want a tiny little bit of slack so you can just pick it up like that. The difference is these saws, any other saw apart from a carving bar, has got a sprocket in it. Now a sprocket is the little bit that turns on the end here, so it's like a little gear on a little bearing kind of. It's a very simple bearing, but it turns in here. Carving bars don't have that. You spend 90% of the time when you're doing detail work when you're carving just using the tip. So you're plunging it into wood, you're rotating it, you're putting all sorts of weird tension on it. So when you do that, it absolutely knackers the end of the bar and it knackers the sprocket. So what they do to fight this is they put an entire metal bar. So there's no sprocket in there. That's just this part of the bar here is exactly the same as the bar there. It just runs along a channel.
Am I right in thinking that that's just sort of perishable, and as that wears down, you just kind of keep it?
No, there is a limit. There is a limit. I mean, it's not like the depth to which the chain sinks into it is. You can't go down to here.
No.
They will get knackered. What tends to happen with carving bars is they'll actually split, they'll delaminate. But that's to do with how you use it and how well lubricated the chain is. But it's helped a lot by the chain being loose. It goes back to the original point. That is why this chain hangs like that.
Yeah, so that with centrifugal force, it's kind of away from the tip.
Kind of, yeah.
Possible.
Basically, it doesn't follow this angle as tightly as the bar is. Do you know what I mean? So the angle at which the chain approaches it is actually quite a lot bigger than how tight that little radius is there. So if you had the chain tight and you're going around that radius and you were constantly doing this, it would heat this up to such a point that it would delaminate within a couple of hours. But if you've got it the right chain on, and you've got it at the right tension, and you use it correctly, that will never come off. I've never had a carving chain come off, and I've had them super loose before. I think even my small MS150 here is even slacker. That's pretty much the smallest.
I feel like you could just take that off right now.
We'll try it. I don't watch your fingers, but it's not happening. You see?
No, you're right. Actually,
it's just tight enough to stay on. So it might look slack, but as that turns, As long as you don't do anything daft with it, that's going to stay on there. It's just going to always come back into the little valley there, and it's going to run around quite smoothly. And this is a pro tip here now for carving. Carving chains are not the same as normal chains. They are normal chains,
you
but
couldn't just take a normal saw and remove the sprocket if your sprocket gets knackered or whatever.
No,
you can't just
don't
go
be
out
doing
and
that.
run a normal
Don't
chain.
be adapting chainsaw bars on your own. No chance. That's not a good idea. But what you do is,
I would never do such a thing.
you've got plenty of tools in your workshop. I'm sure you can give it a go. So this is a pro tip here. So this might go over some people's heads, but to reduce the pressure on the bar and chain even more, chainsaw carvers actually take the heel and the toe off of the cutter. So you see the back end of the cutter there, I've just taken a little bit off. So it's
so you make the actual
double angle.
tooth
Shorter.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
So normally the back end of your cutter, your top plate, would be sort of like this, but I've cut that angle off so that it's smoother. I've also done the same thing with the depth gauge on every tooth. Now what that does is it drastically reduces how hot this chain gets when you're running it, and it
Less
will,
friction in it.
it will and it's also much easier to use. You can do much more intricate shapes, intricate punch cuts, which make it great for doing detail carving. So that's a bit of a faff, and not everybody's going to do that, but it'll give me maybe 4 or 5 times the life out of the bar and chain by doing that. So it's worth considering, but it's not something that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
I think Stihl and maybe some other brands are actually thinking about bringing out a carving chain, and they might have already done that actually, I'm not 100% sure, but before that, that's just what we did. We used to take the heel and the toe off them, and it makes it a lot easier.
Right, so another thing I was wondering is the pitch on my China saw is different to all the Stihl saws. Now, that's something I noticed when I went to buy a Stihl chain. Does it make a difference having different pitch, or
Yeah. This is
it
something
just purely you can't buy a Stihl saw? Or a
This is
Stihl
something
chain?
that really annoys me about the manufacturers. They have been so difficult, and they have made it almost impossible for people to discern the different pitches between all the different makes.
Should we cover what pitch is, just in case?
Yeah. Let's do it. Okay, so maybe you noticed that some of these bars are not only longer than other ones, but they're also narrower. So that's your gauge. If you're ahead and we're talking about a chain gauge, the gauge is the size of the drive link that slots into the groove in the bar. So the bar is essentially in 3 bits, so you think about it. We've got 2 rails, and then we've got a centre bit in the centre, so you've got 3 bits of metal stuck together. That little groove in between the 2 rails, that's the gauge. And so it's basically the thickness of the drive link of the chain. And that usually corresponds to also the size of the tie straps and the cutters as well, but that's what they're talking about when they're talking about gauge. Pitch is even more awkward than that. So
Yeah,
pitch,
'cause that's the main problem I've got with my saw, is trying to get a new bar and a new chain.
So
I need
pitch
to
is,
make sure I get China ones.
yeah, well, that's it. I mean, pitch is very annoying. Again, it's one of these measurements that is an industry measurement, and it's not really designed to be understandable. It's just, they just pick the first thing, oh, that'll do, and then they just ran with it. So pitch is, if you look at a chain, the little bits that are attaching every piece of metal together, the little rivets, so you take the distance between 3 of those rivets and you divide it by 2. That's your pitch. And that's basically to do with the length of the chain. And it's bonkers.
No, literally just being awkward.
Yeah, it is, and they don't make it easy by making them all standard size. What I tend to do is I tend to look at it in terms of saws. So once I've got a set of saws, I will know the pitch and stuff of each of those saws. I'll keep the chains all separately stored for each of those saws, and that way I don't have to think about the numbers. I just know those are labelled for that saw, know the inputs.
Do you still have different pitches as they go up in size?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
Your pitch of my little carving saw there is absolutely tiny. The pico tips. And when you get up to the bigger ones, you're looking at huge big pitches. Much bigger cutters, much longer chains. And then when you go up above that, you're looking at forestry machinery. They've got even bigger ones. Enormous big chains.
So the forestry guys have got the biggest ones.
They tend to have the biggest one. They would argue some other bigger things as well, but that's just showing off. We all know who the hardest people in tree work are. Yeah, so basically they're being awkward.
The YouTubers.
Yeah, the bushcrafters. So yeah, and it comes the same thing with sharpening. They'd never make all the standard file sizes all a standard measurement. You need the chart for each individual manufacturer.
Yeah, that was
to
something
see.
I've noticed, because I've got like 3 chainsaw files that I've collected over the years, and yeah, none of them are the same.
Yeah, they don't fit every saw. Yeah, yeah. Some of them are different shapes.
Yeah.
You can get round ones, you can get square ones, you can get special beveled ones.
Square grinding, that's something I'm interested in.
Square
Do you need
grinding.
to get a special chain for that? Or can you square grind a round chain?
Technically, you probably could square grind a round chain. It's not going to be as good. A square ground chain is not something that's going to be used very often in work. We call it racing chain. It cuts super fast because basically it's like a chisel. It's got a chisel on the cutting edge, on the leading edge, and on the side. Most normal chains are round ground, so that instead of that side of the cutter being straight, it'll be sort of round because the file goes through at that angle.
Yeah.
Makes
So
the top one
more
straight.
like a cheese grater rather than a
Yeah,
chisel.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it tends to be more robust. That cut, when you hit a piece of stone or some grit or sand or whatever in your woods, it tends to stand up better than the square ground chain. The square ground chain is really for your hot saws and your racing. It cuts super fast, but it dulls super fast as well.
Ah, okay. Yeah, because that was something I was really interested in, was trying to get it to cut as fast as possible. But
It's not going to be
pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah, it'll go blunt really, really fast, and
Yeah.
for the amount of effort it takes to actually get the sharpening of a square ground chain right, it's probably not worth it. You just go for the round ground one, and then you don't have to worry about.
Easier to sharpen as well.
It is easier to sharpen. It lasts longer, yeah, and it's easier to find as well.
Okay, cool. Oh, electric saws. I was wondering about. You don't have any here.
I don't have any electric saws with me today, no, but they are becoming much more popular, and the technology is getting really quite good now. The next climbing saw that I buy will 100% be a battery operating saw.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
they're really good.
I'd have thought in the professional world, batteries running out of power would just be a major problem.
They were, and
You
it's
need
why.
to buy
Well, exactly.
loads and loads of batteries.
It's loads of batteries. Yeah, there's for a long time. Electric saws have been around for quite a while now, and the professional world hasn't really been touching them because the battery technology wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
Now the batteries are getting good enough, and
Okay.
so some of the top handle saws, for example, you can get more or less a full day's cutting. If you're doing if you're doing pruning, for example, where you're not cutting just 100%, you're maybe cutting every couple of minutes, doing a couple of cuts. You can almost get a full tree pruned out of one battery. And most saws come with 2 batteries, so that will give you the ability to maybe even dismantle the crown of a tree. There's no fumes. There's very little noise off it as well. You don't barely even need your ear defenders, and it's instant
You hear
torque.
what?
Yeah, well, if you don't use your ear defenders, that's what you're going to end up with, and I'm going that way myself, even with ear defenders. But they're very, very quiet, and they're a pleasure to use. I'm going to go against the grain here slightly and say that the Huskies have got a little bit of an edge on the Stihl right now, the Stihl electric saws. I would get the 540i if I was going to get a top-handled electric battery-powered saw, and definitely, if one of those two at the front, knackers itself or ends up, then for whatever reason gives up. I don't think it's going to happen anything soon. I would replace it with a 540i.
Wow. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. And you've got to think environmentally these days as well. There's less emissions, and we can argue about the environmental cost of batteries all day long, but electric is the way of the future, and I think you're going to see a lot more
heading that
electric
way
saws.
for cars and everything, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the batteries are going to get so good in the next 20 years that planes are going to be able to run on them. So that's where we're going. And that's sci-fi right there.
Yep, right.
We're getting too deep, man.
I know, we're starting to talk about cars and planes. That's not what we're here for.
So there we go. So hopefully we've answered some questions there. Again, if you've got any more questions, because I know there's a lot of information there, it's bound to have sparked some ideas in people's heads and some other questions. Send them Skye's way, and maybe we'll do another video, or we'll reply in the comments. Another Ask an Arborist video kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd just like to say a huge big thanks to Martin for coming out and bringing all his fancy saws out. They're really, really impressive, and it's been a really fun day. So if you want to go check out his YouTube channel, Greener Glens, it's amazing. He covers all sorts of bushcraft related things. Not so much chainsaw stuff, is it?
Not yet, no.
But it's really good. If you like bushcraft, obviously you're watching my channel. Go check it out. He's got a wealth of knowledge on wild edibles. He's a really fun guy. But yeah, and just all sorts of carving stuff. Also, you've got a Facebook page, haven't you?
I've got a Facebook page. Yeah, it's Greener Glens Bushcraft and Wild Food. I've got all sorts of things on
Yep.
leatherworking, bushcraft, and obviously wild food, recipe ideas for wild food, identification of mushrooms. I'm into it all.
Yeah, so like I say, he's really done me a favour bringing all this cool stuff out here, and yeah, you could really help him out there with a few subs, and just going and checking him out. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe. See you in the next one.
See you later.
Shall we fade away?